Well, good evening, everyone, and this is our Brexit celebration conversation. We're also going to discuss a little bit about Trump, but as a few of us here, I just want to kind of briefly introduce some of you. We've got Aaron from London, although not technically from London, but living in London, and we've got Michal from the Netherlands, I believe, and we've got Ryan from Barnsley in England, in the north of England, and we've got Mish. Is it Mishu? I'm pronouncing that correctly from the US.
Mish
Badly.
like Mish like fish is probably the easiest way to go about it. That's how I
Mish.
tell kids
All
to
right.
pronounce it. It's Mishael. It's Hebrew. Go
Okay.
figure.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, anyway, and thanks for joining. Great. I was really looking forward to having this conversation with people after the excellent Brexit win in the UK, coming out of the EU. Just yeah, I just want to sort of hear people's thoughts about it, just briefly, quickly. And Mish, I'd like to hear yours because I've heard a few of the other fellas. So, but I'd like to hear yours first if you had any thoughts.
Sure. So I actually, so I'm not sure how many people know. I'm Nigerian, but I actually grew up in Canterbury. I went to Vernon Home and Kent College before moving over to the States around when I was 12. I love everything about Western civilization and just, the thought of other people coming trying to make it something that no one wants it to be is kind of a scary thing. And, people keep on talking about how this is supposed to be about free trade, and it's like, hmm, have you not seen the other organizations or other nations that can actually, operate without being part of the EU? Our European Union warrants anything to do with free trade or proposed armies? Those sorts of things just seem kind of silly. Yeah, sure, it was sold as free trade, but I'm not sure it's exactly what people think it is. So I was absolutely happy about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I certainly got a lot of. I got like I woke up, I think on Thursday, no Friday morning. Sorry, yeah. And I had like about 50 messages from US friends. It obviously, well, they hadn't stayed up all night, but because it wasn't night time for them. But yeah, I was like, I was kind of I went to bed, and then I was spoken to Aaron and Ryan about this. It was kind of, I think probably it's not going to happen. And we had a hangout before the night before, and we sort of thought, but this is a good thing because there's 50% of we're going through all these platitudes, weren't we, beforehand? And but yeah, I woke up with that great. I sort of had a big smile on my face all day, I think.
Just to echo Patrick's thoughts, that he's bang on the money there in saying that nobody expected Brexit to happen. When the results were coming through, I was in the process of coming home from counting the vote in Westminster. It was about 4 in the morning, and I was on the bus coming home. I was constantly looking at news coverage, and every result that was coming in, it was like every part of the country, with the exception of London, pretty much in Scotland, voted to leave, and I just couldn't believe it. They Towards the end, just before they announced that there's no way that the Remain votes could catch up, it was just unbelievable. Nobody anticipated this. Nobody, and I think for some people, for a lot of people, actually, they've still not accepted it because everybody expected us to stay in. Everybody, even the gambling institutions in this country, they expected it, and usually they're the ones who get everything right. So massive shock, absolutely. And what was really cool was, I know I said this to a few of the other guys, was when I was at Westminster counting the vote for that particular region, it was staunchly a Remain area. And when the first few results came in, it looked like we were going to stay in, but then after that, it was just a landslide for leave. And the people's faces there as the results were coming in, how they were getting paler and paler, it was a picture to behold. It was beautiful. And when we was coming home, it was quite strange because there were other people at the bus stop who were making the same commute as us, and they were actually crying. So we've got me and my fiance celebrating, and then everybody is like crying and hugging each other, feeling really sorry for themselves. So it's a really strange feeling, seeing everybody being really upset and us being highly elated, but tough on them, you know. At the end of the day, the underdog won, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has stirred up such strong emotions. I mean, I remember going into work that night, and everybody were talking about it, and you know, most people I work with quite politically uninterested, you know, but people probably not voted before, and they were really excited about this.
Well, it's like in my family, a lot of people have not voted for several decades just because they were so disillusioned with politics. This is the highest turnout we've had in about 25 years. 72% of the population voted, which is ridiculously high. I remember when it was the general election last year, and it was around 50%. It might have been a tiny bit more, but nobody expected it to be this high, 72%. That's an unbelievable amount.
I think that's why we won as well. You know, Britex has come out in force.
Yeah, but if the youth wanted to stay in, if more of them came out in force, it could have easily swung the other way, but the youth were quite simply too idle.
Well, that's running joke, innit? They were all virtual signalling on Facebook. It run up to election, and then election day come and it rained.
Right.
They all stayed in house.
Yeah, it was quite funny because when it did rain, it was like thunderstorms. And
flooding where I was. So.
Yeah, I mean, I said to my fiancée, who was already at the counting station, where it was based wasn't too far from where she actually worked. I said I might not be able to make her because public transport, it's been on the news, and there's a lot of delays on the underground network. I might not be able to. Well, I left the house early, thinking that I might be able to get there, but only just by the skin of my teeth, and that was literally the case because public transport was so heavily delayed. But I don't think the rain was a massive factor in preventing people from going out.
No.
A lot of the officers would have been quite close to where they lived for them to register the vote. So I think the rain's a pretty poor excuse. I just think it was just God's way of trying to influence the result. I mean, the night before we had thunderstorms.
Right.
Throughout the following day we had thunderstorms, and then afterwards we had thunderstorms. So that was just God letting His presence known.
Hey, so I was going to ask Michał, what was your thoughts on it, dude? Are you there?
Hi, Pat. Sorry.
Hey, what were your thoughts on it? Did you watch it, or what were you kind of nonplussed, like perhaps we were initially, and whatever?
So the first referendum polls I saw, it was actually quite sad because it looked like Brexit was losing. But yeah, when I woke up, I was really happy that you did it.
Yeah.
I was for a moment I was thinking, how are we going to win with if Europe is gonna stay? It's gonna be really difficult, but yeah, you guys made it, and I'm really happy about that. It's gonna be much easier, I think, now.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it was a huge surprise. I mean, even we were discussing, some of us were discussing earlier how, I mean, for me, I now look at the bookies, like the betting offices, to check out because they're normally the best pollsters, But even the bookies got this wrong. You could have made an absolute score on the.
Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, they got it completely wrong as well. It was a big Remain. I can't remember what the odds were now, but they were good. They were pretty good for like if you'd gone for a betted on a Brexit, So yeah, even they didn't get it right. I mean, I think
it was 6-1 or 7-1.
Something like that. It was really pretty good. I mean, it wasn't huge, but it was. You would have got a nice killing off it if you'd put 50 quid down on it or something. So yeah, and I think that was one of the things I think which was quite. I mean, this is kind of where we kind of maybe merge into the Trump phenomena as much as the Brexit one. One of the interesting thoughts that I had was how the mainstream media in the UK have been so out of kilter, out of step with with mainstream opinion. Now, of course, you could argue it's 50-50, right? And I don't necessarily believe that all Remainers are SJWs, as we like to call them, you know, social justice warriors. There are a lot of vocal ones that are, but you know, and in fairness, there are a lot of decent Remainers out there who weren't insulting people with racism and all that kind of thing. I certainly wouldn't want to accuse them all of that, but there certainly was there was enough of that, which I think maybe with the posting that people weren't telling exit posters, unlike me who did, that they were voting out. You know, that perhaps they said, "Oh, I'm voting in," just because they just wanted a quiet life. That's kind of a very typically English way of dealing with things. You know, you know, if that's the kind of approach. So I'm thinking that's a lot of it is the mainstream media just doesn't have a clue that there's this huge underbelly of silence, I guess you could call it.
Right, it's
which I
a
think is
phenomenon
true of Trump.
of the silent
Yeah.
majority. People don't realize the numbers that are out there that don't believe a single word that's written or that's televised you know, in the mainstream media. Yeah.
One point I wanted to add was what was particularly interesting is looking at the vote breakdown and watching the news over here. Well, obviously alternative news because the BBC can't be trusted. Is that the people wanting to remain will make it look as if it's the white British who are typically being xenophobic and racist, but that couldn't be any further from the case because a lot of minorities voted, and it kind of transcended the usual kind of race baiting you get with politics. So a lot of people I know from the Asian community, Afro-Caribbean community, including Europeans who've got British citizenship, a lot voted to stay, to get out. But you won't hear that in the mainstream media, especially the BBC. They're just portraying it as it's these narrow-minded people outside of London who are xenophobes, who are racist, who've probably never seen a migrant in their life. All this kind of nonsense. But it's going to be interesting because we're constantly told in the UK how Trump is this divisive figure, where it's not the case at all. I mean, the BBC is really putting him in a negative light. And it's going to be interesting because from what I can see, across minorities in America, he's got the highest approval rating that any Republican candidate's ever had.
Right. Any informed minority is skeptical of to almost to the point of loathing in terms of Hillary Clinton, and yeah, I just can't see how you would rather have someone who's proven to kill millions of people compared to someone who's like NATO, the UN, they're not really that great of a, you know, they're not really benefiting us at all.
But what's really interesting is how in the British media we've not really seen or heard much regarding her foreign policy. There's been very little comment regarding that, or the email scandal, which is still being investigated for by the FBI. So she's kind of like being portrayed as this really progressive person. She's a female. It's what the Americans need. America needs a change to its traditional chauvinist politics and don't need somebody such as a showman as Donald Trump. And of course, I mean, we're all aware of the problems surrounding the Clinton dynasty. But the mainstream media won't tell you anything regarding that, especially, you know, as Stefan's highlighted a few times on his shows, Bill Clinton's infidelity and the illegitimate children that he's alleged to have had. But none of this, I mean, whenever I speak to people about this in the UK, a lot of people are overwhelmingly, they don't like Trump, but they're just bought into the mainstream media's narrative. And when you start discussing these things and start bringing these ideas to the table, they're like, whoa, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. How do you know this? So it then starts to show them the evidence, and then they're like, oh. And then they kind of change the conversation because they've had a belief that these people are really virtuous from what the mainstream media has told them. And when they see evidence which is to the contrary, they rest very uncomfortable with it. But I think the longer the election goes, I think Trump will, he's getting more popular in this country. More and more people, especially the working classes, the more and more he's beginning to, gain their respect, and quite rightly, they should respect him. I mean, I think he's a great candidate.
Of course, he came to Britain at the most excellent moment, didn't he? I think he literally touched down in his helicopter in Scotland about half an hour after Cameron had resigned, with a brilliant speech, which of course pissed off all the leftists in our country. But it was a really good speech and a reasonable one. It wasn't like a rubbing your nose, but of course, all the Scots got all kind of arsey about it, kind of funny. But,
Yeah, that's a persuasion on a new level. I've been getting into what Scott Adams has been saying recently, and it's like, you just don't understand what he's doing. You're like, how can he possibly be so popular? Because you don't understand popularity. That's why. It's hilarious. It's really weird how people limit themselves in terms of where they get their information. I mean, it's almost scary. It's like you literally only listen to 3 different sources for all of your information, and that's the problem.
And I think on top of that, you have a lot of these celebrities, and I imagine this is the case in America as well. Near enough every celebrity known came out in favor of Remain. And it's quite funny because these celebrities live very detached lives. They have nothing in common with the likes of you or I. And what was quite funny was there's been a few cases of this on Twitter where, as the results were coming in, and it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that we won, that they came out with the whole, I couldn't believe Britain was so racist and so xenophobic. And of course, they received a massive backlash on Twitter. But these people are just, they have nothing, they don't see what we see on a day-to-day basis. They're so far removed from reality. And I think one of the great things is, especially with Brexit, and I think it'll be the case probably with Trump as well in America, that a lot of people are just seeing through these celebrities and think, what the hell are they on about? They've got nothing in common with us. They can't speak for us. And people just naturally see it now as patronizing, whereas before people think, well, hold on a second, if such and such a celebrity thinks this, then I must think that. Whereas now a lot of people think of these celebrities, that what they're saying means shit, it means nothing. And it's an exciting time we live in, especially with the internet, the access to information. It's really, really surprising that a lot of these lefty lovies think they can speak on behalf of people. And I mean, wasn't there a video by Paul Joseph Watson who done something about George Clooney? He was kept on going on about refugees, and yeah, and he's got like $50 million or something in his account, and he's got about like 5 stately homes, and he's not housed a single one. People see through all this now, whereas people would have thought a few years ago, yeah, he's got a point. But yeah, that's me going on a tangent there. I'll shut up.
That's a good tangent. Yeah. So I'm curious, bringing it a little bit back to Brexit, but we can obviously talk about Trump a bit more later. But I'm curious. I mean, what are people's thoughts about this clamour? And it's not just amongst the usual suspects, as we call them, but this clamour for a second referendum, which seems to have been getting some traction in the BBC, on ITN, and this is all local British television networks I'm talking about, and also in the newspapers, and more notably the Independent and of course the Guardian, and 3.5 million votes, and just a touch that just recently it's been found out that I think they've been using spam accounts to create all these particular votes for this particular petition. And just to give Mish some idea what it's about, the petition is a bit like that American thing. I think it's called change.org. It's a little bit like that. So it's but it's for the British Parliament, of course.
Yeah, I think a lot of these emails have come from abroad. So people think that the more signatures this thing's going to have, the more credence it will have. But Cameron said before that no matter what the result, there won't be a second referendum.
A never-ending.
Huh?
I think. Well, that was a good line for him. Not bad.
Yeah, I mean, so and a lot of people have also echoed that recently, despite what the media is trying to say. But if hypothetically one did come about, which I think is highly unlikely, I think we'll see revolts on the street that we've never seen before.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, even regarding Trump, of course. I mean, I saw Lauren Southern the other night. I think it was Friday. I think it was Friday night actually, or Friday day, or whatever the evening, etc. She'd come to London, and there was a bit of a Brexit revolt, of course, going on with the Antifa and all of that. And she got her cameraman was punched and stuff like that. And the police were all kind of like typically, of course, we're gonna ask the reasonable ones to be more reasonable. So rather than the glossed up people, in their balaclavas and everything, yeah, we're gonna. So there was clearly a lot of tension, of course, after the referendum,
Yeah, that was kind of weird. What in God's name is when you vote once, and if you even bother to do it at all, if you believe in the process, and I'm sometimes skeptical of the process, then you stick with it. That's it. I don't understand it. That was just unbelievable that they could possibly do. That's like really Stalinist. Like, it doesn't matter how you vote. It matters who counts them in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of. I mean, we don't necessarily have to go too in depth in this, but I kind of do think it has a lot to do with the arcade theory, and I say that because, I think. I mean, I'm just going to talk generally here. Of course, it's not necessarily empirical proof or anything like that, but I think generally speaking, conservatives, or at least conservatives these days, let's say, maybe there was a difference in the past, maybe, but they tend to sort of be a little bit more sanguine about loss and defeat. They'll take it on the chin, and maybe to some degree they've taken it too much on the chin of recent years, which is hence the way people have described them as cucks, and all that kind of stuff, which might well be true, but there is this kind of, I guess, this kind of honourable thing where, okay, well, we've lost and we just have to rally around and improve our arguments and whatever, Whereas the left, they just seem to scream like, I mean, I keep saying it just sounds too cliched now almost, but they are literally like children babies throwing their toys out of the pram, sort of thing. It's astonishing, the degree that they will go to. And I will be clear. I don't think I want to tar everyone on the left in this regard, because there are decent people like Dave Rubin and what I would call classical liberals that are less probably less inclined to do that kind of thing, not inclined to do it at all, but yeah, it's there's this kind of and I guess this goes back to perhaps this discussion we had earlier, perhaps on a different call, but where we talked about millennials perhaps and their inability to accept the word no. Perhaps,
I was just thinking that, yeah, this like regressive left, they've never been defeated in their lifetimes.
Or faced real adversity.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we're talking before about like, especially like students who've never had jobs. They've gone straight from school to university, and that's what a lot of these Antifa and SJWs are. Like I said, they've just never really faced any sort of adversity.
But I also think some of these, particularly Antifa, I don't necessarily equate all SJWs with the Antifa types. Antifa being anti-fascist, for those who don't know. Because a friend of mine said to me the other night, a good friend of mine from FDR actually, Phil, and he said these people have got nothing to lose, and these are the worst kind of people to get into any altercation because they have absolutely nothing to lose, you know, and I did wonder at that, you know, the ability, if you hadn't had a job, you hadn't got any kind of career, you were kind of, I don't know whether, I'm not necessarily always relying on welfare, but welfare might be a part of it, or family income, whatever it is, you know. But there does seem to be this kind of, I mean, they are so aggressive, they're so, well, I say aggressive, they're violent, you know, they're you know, I saw a demonstration in Australia which were demonstrating against the Islamic immigration in their country. You know, they don't have anything like what we have, and literally these guys came up almost like tooled up like football hooligans straight up to them and went literally straight through the police lines and attacking them. You know, and they literally kind of crazy guys, you know. I mean, you know, on a par that the only par I could really, and I never really was particularly involved with, although I went to football matches, I was never particularly involved with the hooliganism aspect of it, but it's perhaps the only area I've seen that kind of aggression, you know.
Right. I suppose on the flip side of that, though, they haven't got no agency. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, they can all show up in London and throw flares about and kick off and smash some windows. But I think, you know, because they're not in work and they're not really productive members of society, I don't think they could really organise.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Or do anything meaningful. All they can do is just throw these massive tantrums.
Yeah.
And I think if they ever did get any sort of like any sort of size, they'd all turn on each other.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, they don't really have any principles, do they? I don't suppose. You know, the principle is just, I don't know, kind of. This is why I go back to the RK thing, because it's almost like I want what I want, and I don't really have to think about what I want. It's just what I want. You know? And yeah, there's this kind of, and you know, this desire to go into violence, and I mean, it's just an anathema to me. I can't. The last thing I want to go into into any kind of confrontation is to go with my fists flailing. Yeah.
Right. So I did watch what happened in Australia, and I thought that was insane, and of course California as well. Although chronologically after that, you know, Trump was in Houston, and guess how peaceful they were in a firearms-friendly state. They were really peaceful.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, where there were guns, or the potential of, let's say, you know, yeah, they kind of calmed their chilled as they say in England. Yeah.
Right.
It goes back to this, nobody's ever said no to them. Like when these Antifa, they're alright acting like thugs when no one's fighting back, but the minute people start fighting back against them, you know, 'cause if you look at most of them, they're not exactly like 6'6" and you know, hulking great.
No, they're not, and they do it in numbers, of course. So that's the intimidation. It's not. It's, as you say, they're pretty skinny kind of guys, right? Not much to them, right? But because they do it in numbers, that's where the intimidation comes from.
What was that Trump rally? AIDS Skrillex.
Right.
That strange-looking guy was like, "You're a white male."
Oh yeah, him, the guy with glasses, right?
Yeah, and you look at him. He couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag.
No. But he felt he had the whole group around that InfoWars guy, right? And kind of, you know, totally like he had no fear. And of course that huge hulking black guy turned up and defended him, kind of thing. And so of course, you know, it was the classic sort of thing, you know. So yeah, one of those situations where the left just kind of rely on their numbers, I guess. You know.
Yeah, I was going to say earlier, I think in a way this social justice warrior thing, it's good because left have always had this ability to appear reasonable.
Right.
Like, yeah, we're very, very reasonable people, and we're just, you know, we're just trying to do best for everybody. But this is just totally like ripping that mask off, innit, when they're just screaming and shouting and attacking people. I mean, this is what they've always wanted to project onto right, innit?
Yes, I think it is. Yeah,
So
this is why they're called anti-fascist, right? They believe everything that is opposed to their view is fascistic, and ironically isn't. But they, they're like the brown shirts now,
Seriously, they have lost touch with just standard definitions of words. I mean, I don't think anyone's opened a dictionary and like, oh, what does fascism actually mean? It's awful.
Yeah, I agree. So, was there any other particular point? I mean, I have a couple of points about the Brexit thing. I mean, some more political aspects to it. I'm curious what people made of Cameron's decision not to invoke Article 50, and just to give people a sort of brief outline of what Article 50 means, because it's kind of typical status crap. But Article 50, when a nation invokes a nation in the Economic Union, European Union rather, invoke Article 50, that's when they decide to leave the European Union, and there's a 2-year negotiation period before they actually leave, which means they can negotiate with all the individual states within the EU. And his decision not to invoke that, even though actually he had actually said it, he said that he would do that if there was a Brexit, and he decided not to. His excuse was that he wasn't the man, the captain, as he liked to call it, to steer that ship into that territory. Of course, there's certain elements from the left that are saying, oh, this is Cameron putting a spanner in the works. Technically, he's essentially stalling the process, and and of course, people are saying no one wants to pick up this poison chalice, as they call it, as some people are describing it. That Boris Johnson, with his declaration that there's no rush to leave the EU, etc., was basically an excuse of wanting to not leave the EU. And the same with Michael Gove. I think Michael Gove said I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something similar to the effect, and that this was just these were just excuses not to take up that challenge, And I'm just curious, what did people make of that? If they make anything of it, to be honest, it could be complete bullshit. But just curious.
What really angers me is that Cameron called for the referendum, and now, as you say, he's choosing to jump ship. As he called the referendum, he should be the one around to deal with the consequences of the referendum, because now there's going to be. Now we've got to wait for his replacement. That's going to take several months. I think it's October when his replacement's going to be confirmed. He should just stay in post until it's all sorted. I think him jumping ship, I've lost a lot of respect for him. I never had much respect for him anyway, but what respect I had has definitely now disappeared. He should stay. That's the moral thing. He should stay and sort it out.
Yeah, I mean, given that he did say, and I did actually I did some research yesterday just to make sure, and he did actually say that he would follow through literally the following day with invoking Article 50, and he has decided not to do that. And of course, in typical Weasley fashion, as we're used to with Cameron, he's weaseled his way out of it. And I don't know, but what do you think about all these claims that this is a kind of that Boris or whoever takes up the Conservative position? Do you think there's any claim to this idea that they don't want to be the one that invokes the article, etc.? I don't know.
I don't know. It's going to be interesting, because I think if it's Michael Gove or Boris Johnson, I think they'll go ahead with it. I think they'll go ahead with it. But it's
messy, right?
It's very messy. Things will only become a lot more clearer next week.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been so much going on politically, and even with the Labour Party earlier today, it seems like British politics has completely turned upside down. I mean, I don't know if anyone's heard about it, but the Liberal Democrats have said that they're going to fight for us to be in the EU.
Yeah, I have.
I mean, thank God the Liberal Democrats, no one votes for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're at their lowest ever.
Yeah.
I think they're lowest in history. Their lowest. What's the word? Yeah.
Lowest
Anyway,
popularity.
lowest popularity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were in that coalition with the Conservatives, but since then they've just kind of faded away, and for good reason. But Brexit to one side a second, I do think I'm looking at the future, and it's difficult to see what's going to happen because all the political parties are in disarray at the moment.
They are.
The
And
only
not
exceptions being the Lib Dems, who no one votes for.
Or maybe the SNP, even. You know,
I don't care about them. That's Scotland.
No, I don't either. But they do seem to be the most unified of all, let's say. And of course, they're relegated to Scotland, of course. You know. But I mean, there is this. Let's just talk more broadly then. I mean, I don't know how familiar Mish has been with watching the social media or even the mainstream media over here, or even in the US to some degree, because to some degree, like papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post have been echoing a lot of the bullshit crap that the Independent and Guardian have been talking about, with rather innocuous claims of Brexiters wishing they hadn't voted, and you know, and
Yeah, so we've been getting a lot of that, and it's like, so they're trying to correlate Google searches for the EU, which is probably Americans trying to figure out exactly how difficult reform is in the EU, and not a lot of people have watched Brexit the movie and things like that. But just listening to you guys, I wanted to make just a note that it's really surprising because even on some channels, Cameron's actions have been painted as noble in defeat. Not, it's not been, really pointed to the fact that he didn't invoke the articles. So that's kind of a surprise to me. I thought, okay, he's going to set this thing up and quit. That's fine, but it's actually, so it's painted as if he's, the good guy in this and sticking to his word.
Right.
Not that he's not actually executing the orders essentially that he's gotten from the British people. So that's a surprise. But yeah, as far as Twitter and Facebook, everyone's been going off about, I didn't really think we would leave. Oh no, that's BS.
Yeah,
I'm not even sure those people who are being televised really voted out. I don't know.
I mean, I heard like things like the people of Cornwall were pleading to have their EU funding returned to them, and what it turned out to actually be was, it turned out to be the leader of the Cornwall Council that was pleading for the money. Not, but of course they wrote a headline that described it as if it was Cornish people, the same people who'd voted out of the EU, all the fishermen and all that down there, you know. And I know Cornwall quite well because I have a few friends down there that are familiar with the opinion down there, let's say. And it was hilarious because this whole article was just, it was all about the council, which is the local municipality, you know, like the local government, you know, complaining about, we want our £60 million a year funding that the EU give us, and the government must, you know, negotiate this hard in the Brexit, you know, negotiations, etc. But the way the newspaper described it, as if you know, it was the local people that were pleading for this money, and it was disingenuous at best and complete fabrication and lies at worst, you know. And then of course there was another story where they were saying how, you know, where Brexit voters, they said Brexit voters furious that we're now leaving because they never imagined they were. And then you had this video of all these Brexiters that were, some of them were like kind of fence-sitting Brexiters, you know, that had just said, oh well, I didn't really think it would leave, and and they were just using. None of them were furious. I think they were just kind of cancer, it's ridiculous, but it was, but they milked this shit, and of course I say shit because it was, it was utter rubbish, It was hilarious at best, but of course it gave the Remain camp or certain screamers in the Remain camp a extra sort of extra firewood to their fire, So
Well, I saw this supposed statistic that 1 million Brexiters are now regretting the decision. And I was like, when did they ask them? Yeah, like it's only been a couple of days. Have they got time to ask 1 million people or more? And
I'm quite sure that there probably were some that woke up to the pound diving like to 1985 levels, and all that kind of stuff. I can imagine there were some that were feeling anxious about it, right? I mean, they're not all. Unfortunately, people aren't always necessarily imbued with the wisdom that we are, in that regard. And so I kind of have some sympathy for that. And so, yeah, maybe. But of course, the FTSE came to the same position it was like a week before, So it wasn't, and the pound was in no weaker a position than it had been. I think at one point it was up. At one point it was up for the highest it had ever been in 4 months. So it went down again a little bit, I think, if I'm going to be honest about it, but not much, And so, yeah, I can kind of understand how there was some, immediate jitters the next day from various Brexiters,
Right. I've been kind of listening to Peter Schiff on this side of the pond, and he's got some points that just when I was looking them up made some sense. There are a lot of people who were shorting, essentially, were trading in a manner that would work out best if Remain won. And whenever you're making trades of that nature, you're usually executing 2 trades. One that's and you're going to make a stop loss on one or the other trade.
Mm.
And the way that works is people are like, oh crap, this went through, and so all of a sudden they're jettisoning out of the pound and jumping into things that are silly like the yen or whatever, mostly because it's completely uncorrelated. If you look between how badly the GBP dropped compared to the euro, it wasn't as bad as compared to the dollar, and the dollar is really right now floating on the high of, oh, Janet Yellen's not gonna she's not gonna go down, she's not gonna go negative, she's eventually going to raise rates for this year, but of course that didn't happen last month, their last meeting, or the two meetings before that in December when they raised the rates. The market crashed pretty much, and we've had on our side 17 straight months of really bad reporting for durable goods or the jobs numbers. Full-time jobs are down, whereas part-time jobs are up. I just wanted to throw that one in there. So the pound's not
right.
that bad off.
Yeah, I was quite aware of the fact there was people shorting. I mean, even Americans I know on the US side, they were like, yay, we must start shorting the market and stuff like that, and I could see that going on, and yeah, I mean that's to be expected whenever there's a big there's a big seismic shift in a position, like a political, social position. It's going to cause some turmoil in the markets, just because it always does, and that's no surprise. And people are going to try and make money off that, and whatever, it's not a huge thing. I think, but in fairness to the Remain side, I mean, I guess we have to look towards the next year and see what's going to happen. There does seem to be the position that potentially we could lose 1% or 1.1%, I think, of GDP, and that's a kind of that's but I think that's bearable, that's workable, that's and if you think that, okay, if we lose that, potentially, given all the lack of regulation, of course, that the UK will be subject to, that actually we could actually increase that GDP anyway. So I don't feel particularly perturbed by it, but I guess we'll just have to see, I suppose, you know.
One thing I wanted to add regarding the financial points that have been expressed is it's been on the news quite a bit today about how it looks like the housing market's going to crash. And they're reporting it as if that's going to be a bad thing. I mean, that's a good thing for most people because most people can't afford to buy property in this country. I don't know how much it's going to drop. If it does, to me, it just looks like more scaremongering. But
well, I certainly do think the housing market does need to drop.
Of course it does. Of course,
yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, it's too expensive. I mean, they're now back to 100% mortgages over here. I recently heard NatWest Bank were introducing 100% mortgages again. These were the same types of mortgages that were caused the 2008 or 2007 crash, you know. So yeah, they seem to be on a kind of the bankers seem to be on the same kind of cocaine they were before, you know. Anyway, let's jump into the Donald, because the Donald fascinates me, and
oh man, I'm so upset. I'm gonna miss this part. Nap time's over.
right. Have you got to go?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, damn. Okay, well, maybe you can listen to the rest of it, and you can add your comments afterwards. But you know, it was nice having you, man.
Yeah, nice meeting you.
Likewise.
Yeah, cool. And any listeners out there, I mean, join the call. I mean, I posted the event page on the chat, so just go there. There is a direct link to the Google Hangout. Come and join us. You know, I mean, otherwise it's just going to be me and Aaron having a natter. Ryan had to go off to work, but yeah. But anyway, let's talk about Trump.
Do you know if Trump was here before the Brexit, or did he come the day after?
He literally arrived, I believe, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he arrived here in a helicopter in Scotland, ironically, just to piss off the Scots, but literally within the hour, or certainly within the time frame that Cameron resigned, around 8:30. You resigned at 8:30 on Friday morning, I believe. So
maybe Trump's visit had brought with him some mystical kind of powers that swayed Brexit. You know?
Yeah, you can imagine, can't you?
I thought it was hilarious when I woke up the next day and I saw him in Scotland. I think he was at one of his golf resorts.
Yeah.
And it just pisses me off how a lot of the Scottish people, they really dislike the guy. And 2 years ago, they loved him because of how much he was bringing to, how much money he was contributing to the Scottish economy. I mean, these golf resorts obviously brought a lot of jobs. But now, ever since he's become a presidential candidate, they've completely lost track of all this about how he's benefited Scotland, and they've bought into this leftist narrative, which obviously we all disagree with about him. But
sorry.
No, I just think it's brilliant that when he was there, I only caught a bit of what he was saying, but Donald being Donald, he just didn't give a shit. You know, he just said it as it is, and his comments said in favour of Brexit. I thought, fantastic. He's going to trigger a lot of people off over here, but good. They deserve to be triggered.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, one of the things, I mean, we sort of touched on earlier was with the Brexit thing, and I'm guessing, not guessing, I know with the same with the Trump issue, is that there is a lot of polarization going on. Now, of course, ironically, everyone blames the polarization on Trump or on Brexit, but ironically, it's not it's not those people that are really causing the polarization. I mean, it's not to argue that people that just have a different opinion to you are causing the polarization. I'm feeling the intense animosity coming from the status quo, coming from those that are having their ideas challenged. And whilst I might not always agree with everything Trump says, and I might not even agree with everything that the Brexit people agree with, right? But I do know that the most reasonable people, and this is just empirically the most reasonable people, are generally the people who vote for Brexit and the people who are supporting Trump. It's not to say that everyone voting on the left isn't reasonable. There are, but they're just few and far between. And the loudmouths, or the cry bullies, as we like to call them, they tend to be in the most part the loudest, and most verbose, let's say.
No, I agree with you. And the one thing, obviously, that the left has is it's got support everywhere. So you've got the media, and I mean, the BBC, for example. The BBC's always had a reputation for being biased and being in favour of leftist agendas, but nobody could foresee how biased it would have been in the lead up to Brexit. And what was really funny was on social media, on the BBC news page, how so many comments, which got countless likes, basically saying, stop being so biased. I mean, near enough every other comment on there where the BBC was pretty much condemning Brexit. There were so many people who were outraged with the BBC's coverage, and it's not like the BBC is a private organisation. I mean, it's something we fund. With our license payers' money.
Well, we're forced to fund it.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have a choice. We're forced to fund it. But what's interesting now is how, rather than being gracious in defeat, the BBC's carrying on with its agenda and trying to promote further negativity regarding the outcome. With obviously talk of there being a second referendum with this stupid vote that was discussed earlier, this petitioning, and how it's trying to. Another point that you raised earlier, which I thought was particularly credible, was how it's trying to interview people who kind of might regret what they've chose. I mean, the ironic thing is the people who they've interviewed, from what I've seen, they've mostly been young adults who are they're highly influenced anyway, no matter what the decision. But what's really interesting is when the BBC interviews people who vote in favour of leaving, do you notice how it's generally elderly people?
Right.
It's nobody around our age group. It's portrayed as they're just old pensioners living in some rural village in, I don't know, North Yorkshire or down in Cornwall, who has never seen a migrant in their life.
Actually, that was an interesting point. Sorry to interrupt you, but that was a really interesting point. The Guardian came up with this kind of thing today where they were talking about how out of touch different voters were. So that apparently that because London, the cities, and all the other thing where immigration had more effect, right? Therefore, where immigration had more effect or had more impact, let's say, they will remain, and those where apparently immigration had less effect outside of the cities and all that kind of thing, that's where the Remainers were, because they weren't taking into account the whole business of white flight and all this kind of stuff that was going on in these, a lot of the reasons a lot of people outside of the cities are against the immigration thing is because they're seeing what's going on in their cities.
Yeah.
Of course, people that live in the cities and embrace multi-culti stuff, and all that, all this kind of thing, they are going to embrace.
Just to add to your point, if you look at the 5 boroughs of London which voted to leave, they were the boroughs that were on the suburbs of London. They were the whitest part of London. But I think it's also worth pointing out again that although the media tries to portray it as it was the elderly white British who wanted to leave against everybody else who wanted to remain, that was definitely a false narrative. But another point I wanted to pick out as well, white flight and how it's never covered in British media. And it's happening it's happening in many cities. I mean, in the American media, they discuss this more, especially when you see like Detroit, parts of Chicago, and parts of California, where a lot of people are leaving because of the Hispanic population increasing. We have a massive problem with white flight in this country. I mean, there's London, which I think something like 800,000 people have now left in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And if you look at other cities like Birmingham, where I'm originally from, this is no exaggeration. All my family have moved out. All my friends that I knew have moved. All my school friends. I know a few people there who I used to work with, and even they're considering moving because their communities changed beyond all recognition. And it's not just white British people who are moving, it's the second generation migrants. So these are people who say, for example, who came in the 50s and the 60s. You know, a lot of these people are leaving as well. They've had enough because they're becoming Muslim ghettos.
Yeah, I mean, of course, people don't want to talk. Well, I mean, whenever they do talk about white flight, of course, they talk about it in negative terms. They talk about it as if people are being racist and etc. And of course, you know, we all understand in group preference, and you know, and of course, you know, there's no problem with. I don't think some integration amongst race is not a particular issue, but London has kind of been swamped, and it's really no surprise that mostly now, for some of my American listeners, Essex, which is a county next to London, has probably been populated now has the claim to owning the Cockney accent because most white people in that county originate from London, you know, and so they carry the accent with them, and so it's kind of ironic, you know. But no one really wants to talk about it, but everyone understands it, you know. And,
but of course, the left will say that we've constantly had immigration, which is false. We've not had not on the scale that we are having at the moment, and there's a key difference. The immigration we had was mostly from Europe.
Yeah,
and it was in waves. So you've always had the Irish coming here. You've always had the Scots. The first mass scale of migration after 1066 was the Hugoans from France, who, being Protestant, they were escaping persecution from the majority who were Catholic. And of course, they came to London, I think about 20,000, and they integrated. The ironic thing is Nigel Farage is descended from them.
right.
And and it's kind of always used against him as a way of saying, how can you be against immigration? You know, despite the fact that his great grandfather was a Hugoan.
Right.
But and then obviously after that you had,
wasn't the 1700s, I think, that migration.
Yeah, and then
I can't remember now.
The next wave you had was pretty much the Jews escaping the Russian pogroms in the 19th century. And you look at, I mean, as Stefan's pointed out on several of his shows, look at how the Jews have contributed to the world in terms of intelligence. I mean, the Ashkenazi Jews have a very high IQ. And the Jews have done very well in London. They've done very well. And then obviously we had the Windrush that occurred in the 1950s and the 60s with Commonwealth migrants coming from the Caribbean and from Asia. Well, sorry, from the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
But the numbers were just not normal. I mean, you're talking 200,000 a year for each successive year, at least up until the 90s, where it started to get progressively higher. I mean, and it all comes down to scale. We've always had migration, but it's the type of people who are coming. Are they assimilating? And if not, why aren't they? And those that don't, predominantly are Muslim. I mean, a lot of Asian people that come here, they integrate in one way or another. I mean, the Hindu community, the Sikh community, the Chinese, so on and so forth. But we always come back to our old friends, the Muslims, and how they stick out like a sore thumb.
Yes, the elephant in the room. Hey, Jared. It's good to see you, man. Thanks for
Hello,
joining us.
Patrick, and is that Aaron?
Hi there,
That's
nice to
Aaron,
meet you.
Nice to meet you, Aaron.
Nice to
Yeah,
meet you.
so I'm going to quickly jump in on Jared and get him by the jugular. What was your? I know I've seen a little bit about your Facebooking, and so we're friends on Facebook also. I've seen some of your thoughts on it. How was your experience of the whole Brexit and situation?
I didn't know what day the voting was, so I got home from work. Excuse me, just waking up, and I got home from work and saw that online that the voting was happening, and just kind of followed it from there. It was great. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was just I was kind of having an okay on the worst side day, but as soon as I saw that, I was like, that was completely behind me, and I was ecstatic.
And I'm just curious because this is a question I wanted to ask Mitch, and I forgot to ask him, because you guys in the US now, I know there's been a lot of talk in the media, etc. But curious, was there any talk amongst like your local people, and was it as big as they describe, like some world, like the media like to describe, like the whole world were talking about it? And I was just curious if just the general Joe blogs were talking about it or not.
I don't know. I can't, of course, speak for the whole U.S., but I'm in South Florida, West Palm Beach, and in my job, I work in a poker room. And something that's unique about that is that every age, race, ethnicity, group, religion will come and gamble and play poker, that's one thing that's wonderful. I meet everyone from everywhere.
Yeah.
Right across the street from an international airport.
Right.
And I'm the one that brings up Brexit and nobody else.
Right. Okay.
So I got to cross paths with, more than a couple hundred people every day, and it's only been a couple days now. Don't get me wrong, but I'm the one that brings it up, and only, I'd say, at least 50-50 they're aware of it having occurred and have some thoughts or opinions on it. Of course, the only pushback I've kind of gotten was a guy in the break room said, "Well, did you see the John Oliver thing on it?" I had to respond, well, he's not an intellectual. He's a comedian. So, no, I can't say I gave 2 bits for his thoughts on it.
And he's also a complete white traitor, I think.
Oh, yeah, and that's another thing I threw in there. And that's also, soaked in complete and utter lefty bias. So, why do I care?
Yeah. I mean, I only because I asked the question partly because there was I saw a clamour, at least certain news outlets, and I don't know whether this was just, again, leftist press trying to portray crazy Texans as some kind of lunatics, but there was this sort of, the Brexit had gone for a Texit, and all that kind of thing, and there was obviously some rumblings on that direction.
Yeah, I can't say I've heard or seen a whole lot about that anywhere other than Facebook, but that's interesting. Yeah, the thought I had whenever you mentioned that was, like kind of a competitive rivalry between the U.S. and the U.K. and Texas might be a bit jealous that you beat them to it. It might be inspiring.
Yeah. And we did it without guns, of course, as Nigel said earlier.
Yes.
Without a shot fired, although, of course, the leftists said, "Oh, but Joe Best, he'd lost the blah, blah, blah," so they tried to pin that on us, but,
I know this is a bit tangential to our conversation, but I want to throw this in there because I saw it yesterday. A guy was pointing out how, I think it was Bill Whittle, one of his firewall things, he was pointing out how Texas, if you drop our cities that have this ridiculous gun control, like D.C. and Chicago, so on and so forth. Yeah. But then, you basically replace that with Texas. Okay, their numbers and stats on murders and crime and stuff like that. America goes from one of the biggest gun crime in comparison to some other background statistics, they go from one of the largest to like on top of everybody as to one of the safest, most peaceful places. And mind you, Texas is the place where you've got everybody owns 5 guns. You know.
Right. Yeah, I get that impression. I know when my father went, I always remember an anecdote my father said when he went to Texas, and I think, my father was involved with the church and stuff like that, and there was some church thing that he was involved in. He was reminded me of the story. He always recanted the story how there was all this church had all this audio equipment like speakers and mixing desks. They're all out on the front lawn, And my father was a little bit sort of perturbed by that. He says, well, "Do you really want to just leave all that equipment out there?" And this Texan preacher said to him, "Well, we've all got guns around here." Of course. My father was like, "Oh, right, okay."
Everybody's real polite. There's also a kind of a joke over here is that you meet the nicest people at the gun shop.
Right.
Or at the gun range, because everybody's real nice to each other, because they're armed.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But yeah, so I always sort of like made me laugh that little quip about, Of course, they all get accused of being rednecks everywhere else, but I'm sure they are pretty decent people mostly.
I think that's the thing, with especially the British media, how a lot of people in the American South are portrayed as being these, backwards thinking people, and of course the British media has the same level of discontent for the northern population of this country. So in a way you can see parallels between northern England and the southern states, how they try and stereotype these people. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, I was always kind of taught when I was at school how the Republicans were all rednecks and they've got all these guns, they're violent, they're racist. Of course, it's a load of bullshit. It's only when you're out of school and you start seeing things from what's going on in the news, looking at social events, and you think, well, hold on a second, what I was taught was a load of bullshit. And if anything, a lot of people in the southern states, to me, they remind me of people from the north of England. The very honest, salt of the earth people. It's more the people from the northern states who they remind me of people from London, this cosmopolitan elite, they're just so arrogant. It just really pees me off.
Yeah. My experience with that is kind of like the South is more of this salt of the earth kind of country, and I remember I was working in a poker room in Jacksonville that had just opened up, and they got all these subplants from people in Connecticut, which is one of our northern states, and their poker room closed and ours opened, and so we hired all those dealers. And I just remember consistently the same response from them was like, "Oh my God, everybody around here is so nice. Like somebody held the door for me the other day. Someone smiled at me and waved. And so basically, I guess there's this idea of the South being more backwards and stuff, but to the degree to which that might be accurate, which is it's really I don't believe that so much. There's also consistently from the north when they come down from the northerners when they come to the southern states this I don't know, this hospitality, like that the cliche of southern hospitality rings true, and that's the same response I get from them. It's like people are amazed when somebody holds the door or smiles at them or asks them how their day was,
That's exactly just like the north of England. I mean, I'm from the middle, but the middle has more in common with the north than it does London and the south of England. And here in London, people are completely different. So if you take into consideration a bus stop, people won't queue for a bus stop here. People just jump on the bus. And people won't talk or say hello to one another, or they won't help, say, somebody with a buggy get on the bus. Whereas in a northern town or city, you can talk to anybody, and it's like you've known them kind of, okay, it's a bit cliche, kind of all your life. You just say, hello, how's it going? And people just start talking to you, and everyone's a lot more down to earth. People queue for the bus. The buses are nice and clean, and it's like the total opposite down here in London. And I think it's one of the reasons why I kind of like long to go back to either the Midlands or the north of the country, just because people are just more down to earth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think
And
they're
I also think that with how Brexit's gone, I think my days living in London are severely limited, because, especially where I work, I was one of the few people that voted in favour of Brexit, and now that they're going to be telling me, look, you've got to go now. You must go. You're too bigoted. You can't stay in London. They're like chasing me out of work.
If you don't like it, well, how about you leave?
Yeah.
Yeah. The ironic thing is, I'm arguably the closest person there to being white British. But I work with all the people there are migrants.
I heard you speaking earlier about how saying something the same thing. Like mostly, it's all immigrants left.
Well, yeah. I mean, taking consideration the recent survey, which was done in 2011, I think it's 43% white British. The survey that was done before that, 10 years previously, in 2001, I think it was something like 63%. The borough I live, which is classed as Greenwich, I think the white British population make up something like 33%. And the numbers are just dwindling every year.
And I think it's the biggest thing to look at is the amount of children in schools. I think it's like it's as low as now as 9% white
It's
children.
interesting that you say that, because my neighbours who live directly opposite me, and it's quite funny because they're typical hypocritical leftists, they send their child to a private school because they don't want their child to have a substandard education.
Exactly.
And of course, a lot of the schools around here, on average, there's only about between 7 to 10% of them are actually white British kids. They're mostly foreign kids that are there. A typical London school, I think on average 40 secondary languages are spoken.
Yeah.
And of course, these leftists who live directly opposite me say, oh, we want our child to have a good education. And I just kind of say to them, look, no, you don't. You just want them to go to a school where their learning won't be compromised. I said, if you're true to your leftist convictions, you wouldn't be sending them somewhere like this because it's elitist. And they were like, oh, no, we're not racist. And I said, look, I can see why you're doing what you're doing. And it's the same with a lot of people who've recently moved down to London who are, white. They look at the schools around here and they're thinking, whoa, I don't want to send my children here because of the simple fact they'll be a minority within the actual class. And also a lot of people my age just simply don't want kids in London because of that. Well, I'm not saying that's the ultimate factor, but it is a factor. The fact that
factor,
a lot of people look around and think, do you want your children to live in an area like this? And
where I live in London, I would never bring up children here. I mean, I really wouldn't. I don't necessarily think bad of people that do, but personally, I would never bring them up here. Because the worst thing I think about here is it's not so much all the multicultural stuff. It's the fact that there's distrust across the board, right? There's even distrust amongst white people and whatever. It's just this kind of keeping it together, and you feel this tension, and maybe it's. I mean, sometimes I've thought, is it just me? I've moved to this area recently, and maybe I'm imagining it and all that kind of stuff. But I get that feeling. I don't get any kind of. I'm not saying that you should have any kind of togetherness like the Coca-Cola ad of the 70s, but but I don't feel that sense of solidarity or group,
No, and that's understandable, and that's one of the reasons I want to get out of London. I've lived in areas where I've had foreign neighbours, and they say hello to me, and we talk and we chat. You don't get that in London with my neighbours. They just want to be left alone, which is understandable because where I live is such a shithole. such a rough area. There's plenty of crime. People feel safe within their little, their little apartment, and they just want to stay in there and just. It's kind of like their safe space.
Sure. Let's try and bring it back to the Brexit thing a little bit more for listeners and stuff. But I'm curious. I mean, maybe this is a question for you, Aaron. But I'm just curious. How do you think, perhaps, let's say if we do manage to leave the EU, etc. I mean, there's lots of talk about how this will affect immigration and all that kind of thing. Do you think this potentially can improve things, or do you think that it might actually polarize things even further potentially?
Well, I think because when most people asked what they wanted from Brexit, immigration was the first thing, first and foremost. So the next government we have, they have to address it. We can't carry on accepting the current level that we have. And I think the government and many people they accept the fact that if it continues the way that it is, there will be unrest in this country. So I think they will do something. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about an Australian points-based system. I can genuinely see the next government going ahead with that. Because if not, we'll have what's going on in Sweden and what's happening obviously in Germany.
You have a positive outlook then. You think that it's a positive outlook then generally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm naturally skeptical, but I'm being optimistic on this.
No, that's fine. I mean, I don't not necessarily saying you're wrong. I think that's great. It's an interesting. Yeah, I guess I'm the eternal pessimist sometimes, in this regard. But I think that does make sense because obviously any politician worth his salt, right? Unless he's a complete virtue signaler like Nick Clegg or something. Yeah, I think it's going to take note. At least the intelligent ones are going to take note of it.
As I said in our hangout earlier, I think it depends a lot on who we get in the next government. I mean, if we get, say, Boris Johnson or Michael Gove, and if Nigel Farage plays a role within the next government, if any of them three people are there, we will get what we set out to achieve. If not, and we get other fringe people come in, maybe not.
Sure.
We just have to wait and just give it a little bit more time. But I genuinely think we will get a points-based system. The people have spoken. The people have been pissed off a long time about this. The government have to listen to. And I think if they don't, it's going to be to their own detriment.
Yeah. What do you think, Jared? If you have had an opinion about this at all?
Two things regarding. Would you mind? Because I guess I haven't followed to this detail, but I don't know who Nigel Farage is. If you just
he's the chap who was the he's the leader of UKIP, which is a political party in the UK. He's the chap who did the Brexit speech, I guess, at 4:30 in the morning the other day. Where he's the guy who's kind of been wanting to get a referendum for, the whole UKIP political party mandate has been about getting a referendum about the European Union.
Okay.
He's the leader of that party, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to, specifically, what was the question? Because I'm not.
The question was really, what do you what's the opinion about where we might particularly go in this regard? I mean, I know you don't necessarily have any personal, experience of it, but just looking from afar, perhaps.
Yeah.
What do you feel is the?
I would look from a very broad, left, right, competition kind of perspective in general. I know one thing I was thinking earlier when you guys were talking about the high rates, the imbalance, and I assume it was the public school system where you had I'm guessing at a maximum 15% basic native children to immigrants in the public school systems. What effect that's going to have in the years coming on? Whether these kids are going to grow up incredibly resenting that, or giving in to that dominant culture they're surrounded by, like saying, okay, this is my peer group, I need to, assimilate to them. But as far as like the immediate political backlashes to this, I think it's great because at the very least, it sends out a signal to the people in the area, or immigrants, who would come to the area to say, like, there's a signal coming from that place that, we don't, that's not what we want, and it's going to be more and more difficult, hopefully, for you to try to just walk right on in. And to me, that's kind of largely what I see the wall being in Mexico, is it's not so much about it being a physical barrier as it is being a statement like, look, this place is no longer welcome.
Psychological,
you can't
right?
You can't just walk right on in. And so to me, that's one of the biggest things about it, is the statement. It's what's being spoken with that action.
And with that, let's discuss the Trump thing. I think we've done Brexit well enough, but let's talk about the Trump thing. I mean, because it definitely has parallels with Brexit, perhaps on a minor, the English is we spill our tea, whereas perhaps the Americans is a bit more verbose, perhaps. But of course, with the San Jose rally riots, or I say riot, they weren't really riots, but the horrible things that happened in San Jose to the Trump supporters there. And what are your thoughts and feelings, because you're kind of on the ground there, in how do you feel the Trump phenomena, as I like to call it, how do you feel that's going to play out for you over there?
Oh my gosh, I've got a lot of thoughts about that. I could go off on a monologue for a while.
By all means.
Well, I don't want to, because it might come off completely, not well put together. So, if you don't mind, getting a little more context, like in what way am I thinking about the Trump phenomena, the impact that'll have?
Okay, I mean, like we were talking about the Brexit, like the demographics changes in London, and also the irritation coming from the cities compared to the Shire, or whatever you want to call it, the countryside, because there was obviously a disparity in the voting. Like there was in the cities, it was all Remain, in the and in the Shires, it was more like a kind of it was all Leave, generally speaking, and there's this kind of polarization going on in the UK. I certainly feel it. I certainly experience it on social media, and I think there is a similar polarization going on over there. I mean, you only look at the Milo Yiannopoulos, right? Situation where he's going into universities, and I'm wondering how much of this is a middle class educated thing. It's a bit similar that's going on here. Like it tends to be the youth that have been, particularly recently, there was, like yesterday, there was a protest order under 25-year-olds, but they were mostly university educated types, and the working class don't really give a shit under that age. They're not really particularly bothered. So there's kind of this kind of push and shove going on in amongst these different classes of people. Now I know class isn't necessarily such a big issue in the US as it is in the UK, but I'd still think the Americans are still captured by a certain amount of class, structure.
Well,
it's not the
I
same
think
degree, of course.
Just not willfully or not consciously, but there's certainly some
economic class, I guess you might want to call it. Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, of course, that hypocrite lefty, who's completely well off, has plenty of money coming in, but has no problem imposing on everybody else these terrible situations. Like they've got the nice walled living community, but with security guards, but they want to vote to take your guns away. So I've kind of got these different ideas built up in my mind. I don't know. I haven't sat down and tried to verify it completely, but I have this idea that the left is really a lot smaller, like by individual, than we think they are,
Right.
because they have the media playing for them. You know, they've got the major universities, they've got the major political positions, and so they get this loud voice, and they've got these, you know, they've got this obnoxious in your face, you know, when you get to the social justice warriors, you know, they make such a big scene that it gives the impression that there's so much of them, there's so many of them. But like I try to find it, like in my day-to-day life, like I go to work and I try to get an idea of like, okay, well, how much is there Trump, how much is there indifferent, how much is there Hillary or something else, you know? And at this point, I can't recall, like there's like one person I come across in my regular, and this is of hundreds of people, that's like will actually admit that they support Hillary. For the most part, and maybe this is just the work environment I'm in, where it, you know, in gambling, but that hasn't been my experience. Where in the gambling environment, people are mostly on the right. That hasn't been my experience there. But
Right.
but also, you know, this is West Palm Beach. This is Trump's home, so that might have a large part to play in it. But for the most part, I get mostly, if someone's on the left, it's ideologically, you know, but a lot of people, most people are Trump supporters, or not necessarily a Hillary supporter, just anti-Trump.
Right.
One question I wanted to ask was, and that was before Trump announced his candidacy for presidency, were there any of these accusations of him being a racist, a sexist before then? Or did
Okay.
these only come to light over the last 12 months?
I only moved here in the last 6 months, so I couldn't tell you that.
Yeah. What about in America in general?
No one necessarily talked about Trump, really, you know.
Yeah. He's just seen as a successful businessman, and that
Yeah,
was it.
pretty much. You know,
Yeah, so it's amazing. I mean, this is what I tell a lot of people here who don't like Trump, and that is, how long have you had these feelings about him? Obviously, feelings that the mainstream media propagated. And I said, they propagate them for a reason. You've bought into them. And they go, oh, no, he's definitely a racist. I said, definitely a sexist. And I go, well, cite me your evidence. What has he said that's been racist? And, of course, they'll say, oh, well, he doesn't like the Mexicans. And I go, well, hold on a second. He's being critical about illegal immigration, which is a problem we also have in this country. And I said, do you know how many illegal immigrants are in America? And, of course, these people have no idea about the topic. They're just going on what the mainstream media said, and because all the celebrities are against him,
they're just doing what the priest class said was right and wrong, and
exactly. I mean, they have no evidence, and the ironic thing is, whenever I debate with them, it's not even a debate because they've got nothing to debate with me. I'll just say to them, look, I am willing to have my opinions about Trump changed, but I need to have credible evidence and not from biased media. Because from what I can see, he's going to be the most enlightening president America's had in a long time.
Yeah, that's really, I guess, a good kind of conflict. You know, because I don't expect anything good to come from government ever. Like the Brexit thing, it's like there's a part of me that's like really timid. You know, like what? You know, I don't expect to be, you know, happy about a decision or thing that government has done. And so Trump coming on the scene, like I've always hated the government. They're the ones that made me go to public school. Aside from, of course, I blame my parents for sending me there too. But it's the lefties and all that who are always pushing for that. And I'm really surprised and really like kind of, I don't know necessarily say skeptical, just wary of being excited about the government doing something. It's like, okay, when is this gonna turn on me? When is it gonna bite? But you know, from everything I see, and I match it up to, you know, what I can make of it.
So Trump must be like a breath of fresh air. I mean, whenever I've seen him do any of his speeches at his rallies, or it was his foreign policy speech, which I saw a couple of weeks ago, and he was reading he was giving these speeches, and he had no prompt sheets or nothing written down. It was all in his head, and he just came across so honest. And I think the people see that in him. They see someone who's got a genuine degree of emotion. He's not a robot. And to me, it's quite understandable why people connect to him. And of course, he's representing a large group of people who feels like they're not being listened to, who are totally disenfranchised with politics. And in a way, there's so many parallels between Brexit and the rise of Trump, and just populist politics in general. I mean, if we take America and Britain out of the equation for 1 second, if you look across Europe at the moment, it's happening throughout. Now we've achieved Brexit. There's populist politicians over there who also want the same thing. So it's almost like it's all happening at once. You know, the last year or so since Trump announced his presidency, that he's going to run for presidency, that we've had this like emergence, amongst people on the right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, 2 years ago, I was all doom and gloom, and I thought, shit, we've lost, and now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's like, fuck, we've got a chance.
But at the same time, isn't there a part of you that's like, wait, what the hell?
Yeah. I mean, as you probably heard, in the media, we're waiting for World War III to start now with Brexit. We're waiting for the Four Horsemen to come and start raping and pillaging London and so on and so forth. We've had all these doom and gloom analogies that are supposedly going to occur if we had Brexit. But what I'm more worried about is going to work tomorrow. And because it was ironic. I'm the only one there who voted in favour of Brexit. I was quite vocal about it and giving my reasons because they were full of misinformation. And I've been off work since Wednesday. And I know I'm going to go in Monday, and I know I'm not going to be very popular. They're going to try and lynch me, I'm telling you.
Oh, man.
Well, listen, I just wanted to sort of echo some of Jared's feelings. I mean, yeah, I've been pretty anti-state for almost 10 years, really, and I certainly haven't voted for 20 years. And
wow.
So the day before yesterday was the first time I voted in that amount of time. So I totally get the kind of, and of course, when you start to hear about the shenanigans that they want to play after the Brexit, and you think, we're back to the same old political bullshit that we seem to be always, experiencing. It's like, it's just one of those. I certainly concur and empathise with that feeling. It's been a little bit astonishing this year, insofar as you've got Trump, who's clearly a person who's come out of nowhere, self-funded, all that kind of thing. Perhaps there is a he has integrity, or at least there's certainly nothing to suggest that he doesn't. At least, I'm not saying he's perfect or anything, but compared to like most politicians, and he doesn't have any particular skeletons in his closet, etc., that he's ignoring, and then we have Brexit, which is a vote purely on whether we just get rid of one tier of government, and that's a kind of opportunity I can't resist. But I certainly have that ambivalence that you have, Jared. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not surprised if that's not something that's rife through our the people we kind of talk to on a regular basis on Facebook. I imagine there's a lot of us that are kind of ambivalent there. But I had some thoughts. Do you mind if I get them out real quick?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
We were talking about like the left and right, stuff like that, and I'm still kind of trying to figure out what the left actually is and what the right actually is. Mainly using RK selection theory largely, and philosophy and sophistry to kind of use that to make a large distinction. And the way I kind of see things in politics in general is that the right, like the Republicans, they're not on the actual right. If there is some objectively philosophical right thing, the Republicans, whoever the political right's been, they're not actually people on the right. They're people on the left, and we can see that Trump helps point that out because Republicans, the established Republicans, hate him. So my thoughts on this is that we haven't heard from the right in a long, long time. They've been becoming more and more like, screw it, politics isn't worth my time. I might as well be a capitalist and go make some money to make change. I'll buy gold, I'll buy guns, And so basically they've been stepping more and more out of this public conversation. We haven't heard from the right, the actual right, in my opinion, in a long time. The Brexit, Trump, things like this happening, I think is them kind of like peeking over. It's going to cause some folks to peek over the fence and be like, okay, well, maybe I can join the party. Right. And I'm hoping, and maybe that's one of those things where this is a more ambitious, productive group of people, in my opinion. Hopefully when they get started and they get to making something happen, it happens fast and it happens, intensely. And it builds up momentum and it goes and it goes. That's kind of the hopeful, optimistic narrative that's playing off in my heart.
Yeah, same here. Definitely. I mean, I'm not. I have my skepticism, but I have my hopes as well. Mm-hmm. And also I have my hopes in people that hold values. And I think this is one of the things that I particularly like about Trump. And to some degree, even the Brexit campaign, they seem to hold the same values. Now, of course, everyone will complain nationalism and all that kind of stuff. It's not really about nationalism. It's really about cultural values, And I think that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, for me.
I think one of the problems we've had in this country is it's been such a taboo to discuss anything regarding race, nationalism, or the preservation of British culture. And it's took an event such as Brexit for us to be more free to discuss these issues. Because no matter whenever we've tried to discuss it, we've always been branded a racist.
We still are, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, and the ironic thing is when you even have black British people or Asian British people reflect what we're saying, they're called Uncle Toms.
You're going to get called a racist either way. You might as well get the voice out.
I think it was. I can't remember his name now. Melkinich, the guy that Stefan interviewed.
John Cernovich.
Cernovich, that was it. It was a Cernovich. He tweeted a thing about how Sikh guys in the UK were tweeting him their confusion that they were being called racist for voting Brexit, which is kind of ironic. Anyway, I wanted to welcome Melon. Melon's a bit nervous about his accent, but I don't really care. I'd like to hear from Melon. How are you, man? Or hopefully maybe a lady, I don't know, but Are you there? Nope, silence. Okay. But anyway, so yeah, I was kind of it was interesting that Cernovich had sort of discovered this kind of. I mean, I knew it was there because I know a little bit of the Sikh community myself. I lived amongst them for about 10 years, and I knew that most of them, pretty much, I didn't have much of an issue with, particularly, and they were, they kind of pretty much integrated into culture. And it's ironic because Sikhs, in many ways, Sikhs had the most, for a long time, had the most extreme clothes, right? Because they had this turban, thing, and for a long time it was seen like I guess to some degree like the burqa was is now, but of course, ironically, but the thing about the history of the Sikhs, of course, what's so interesting about Sikhs is they have managed to integrate into all kinds of communities because they're a little bit like Jews, They're a very small minority,
One
And
thing
they
I wanted
kind
to
of,
add about the Sikh community as well is they've had a long military connection to the British Army, spanning near enough 200 years.
right.
And sorry to interject that, but that's one reason as well. And loads of them fought in the First and Second World War.
Yeah,
Loads of them.
that's true. Yeah.
I'm curious because I know very little about the Sikhs. I know Sikh and then turban, and that's about it.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know an awful lot. But I mean, from what I do know, is that I mean, I had a Sikh girlfriend many years ago, and she told me a little bit about the history of the Sikhs. And in India, where they kind of obviously originate from, they were a minority. They were mostly a minority, and they were mostly warrior types, of course, that protected not just their own people. They often protected their own. I mean, for instance, a very famous. I say famous. I'm famous in Sikh terms. There's a very famous story where they liberated a bunch of Hindu women that had been kidnapped by Muslims in some part of India, and this we're talking back in the 1600s or something, you know. And
Okay.
they did it with a very small army. I think they had like you know, like they were like 10 to 1 in comparison, you know, and they managed to free these women from slavery, etc.
If I could just add, because I do have partial Indian extraction, the Hindu and Sikh community, they're very peaceful. They've integrated very well. They're like a lot of other minorities in this country, how they've integrated as well. The only problems we generally have are with the Muslims. I mean, if you look at Indian history, over 100 million Indians have been wiped out from the Muslim invaders.
Yeah.
If you look at if you look throughout history, when the Muslim conquest of India happened, it was brutal. And what annoys me, it's something that's never discussed. We always hear about white colonialism, but we never hear about the oppressive history of Islam.
No.
Yeah, and they were far brutal in comparison, from my understanding.
Yes. Yeah, they were. Yeah. It's not
And
to say that the
it's not like
British
you can see the places where they were and then left, and how much better those places are, like you can with British colonialism.
Yeah.
Or Western.
But what's quite strange is like where I work, because there's quite a few different minorities there, and we have Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, we've got East Europeans, we've got all sorts. And on the occasion that we go for a drink after work, there's a good cross-section of the workforce there, with the notable exception being Muslims. They will not come out. They will not come out. And one of the reasons for that, I work in a very Islamic area of London, where it has had Sharia, it has had problems with Muslim youth proclaiming it being a Sharia zone. And basically, if female Muslims are seen around and not covered up or drinking, nothing will happen to them there, but later they'll be ostracized in the community. But it's something, you know, that's not discussed. Something, ironically enough, that feminists never want to discuss.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, I'm just going off on a tangent there.
That's fine.
It's awesome to hear like the actual lived experience from someone directly.
Hey, Melon, are you there? Did you want to pipe in at all?
Hello, Melon. Don't be shy.
Hey, Melon.
Melon?
Don't be shy. We're not bothered by your accent. He's a bit worried about his accent, I think.
Where's he from?
I think, was it Finland? I don't know.
Finland's cool.
Yeah. Finland's cool. We're all good with Finland.
Nokia.
What is it? The soldiers of Odin in Finland.
Yeah.
Well, can I say, if you ever want to step in, whatever, and interject, if you want to pipe in, Malin, please don't hesitate.
Please do. But talking of Finland, I mean, there's a really interesting development, of course, been going on in that part of the world. We're talking about the migrant crisis and in Europe, etc. There's been a bunch of young men. I guess they're probably mostly working class, lower to middle class men, etc., called the Soldiers of Odin, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with them, but they should try and look them up on YouTube. They're not a bunch of right-wing fascists as people like to claim they are. They're actually just walking around the streets, making sure people aren't being attacked or verbally abused and stuff like that, and they're being very typically white about it and very reasonable about it, and yeah, I think that's whilst obviously we'd prefer to have you know supposedly our state doing this stuff, but it's great to see that there's some rational people doing it for themselves without going overboard about it, and
But the state can't be trusted. I mean, look at the other day of Laura Southern, who got attacked for wearing a Union jacket by Antifa. There were police there, and she was the one who got told off, if anything.
Oh no, it's that typical thing where we'll berate the most reasonable person rather than And it sort of goes back to, I don't know if either of you are particularly, I know perhaps you are, Aaron, but I don't know if either of you are particularly familiar with Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, very brave.
He's got balls the size that a shame an elephant.
I know, and he had a whole bunch of people turn up, bunch of Muslims turn up on his cul-de-sac in Luton, and his family all went out to sort of protect themselves because they were basically going to attack them, and the police arrived, and the police just decided to arrest the whole Robinson family, because obviously they didn't want to have to deal with, like, compared to like 8 Robinsons and maybe 30 Muslims, they didn't want to. They just went for the easy. They just went, well, we got to just neutralise this, and I guess they just arrested the easiest people. I kind of get why the police do that, but it's just kind of.
Well, one point I wanted to add was regarding the ineptitude of the police. I mean, look at Sweden. I mean, there was that segment that was on YouTube with some news reporters from Australia who got attacked by some members of the Somali community.
Right.
And the police just refused to intervene because their presence alone, they said, would incite hatred in the community. And of course, Sweden's so cooked. There's parts of Sweden now where the police won't go. And I don't blame what the guys have done in Finland with the Sons of Odin vigilante group. I mean, I don't know too much about them, but I know they've got chapters throughout Europe. And I think there's a British chapter, and they've been a group I've been wanting to read more about now for some time, but I find it pretty difficult trying to get hold of information. So unlike Pegida, which is the closest thing we have, with what's going on in Germany, and I know there's several chapters of that throughout Europe as well, you can find a lot of information about Pegida and what they stand for. But the Sons of Odin seem pretty elusive. But if the state can't be trusted, I don't blame.
No,
I don't blame people for making a stand.
No, I don't. I mean, they're doing it in their own best interests, right? And I mean that makes total sense to me. That if the state doesn't come in and sort that out, then of course you're just gonna, there's somebody's gonna go in and fill that position because it needs to be filled. Yeah, and I've always felt this whole thing, and I don't want to breed terror into people, of course, but I do feel this whole thing will essentially be essentially a rising of the working classes, because they are essentially always the ones that take the punches and and the hits, and they're the first ones to realise it because they're the first ones essentially to be affected by it, I guess.
Sorry to interject, Patrick, but I don't know if anyone's noticed, but on the comment section, Melon, who's from Finland, writing some remarks here. Can you guys see them on the right-hand side of the Hangout?
Yeah, I have seen them, yeah.
If you don't have the chat window open, it pops up a little bubble above the person's name. That's what I'm seeing, and tells what they're saying.
Yeah, it's quite... I mean, I know, as you said, Patrick, Melon feels probably uncomfortable about speaking in the group, but it'll be great to hear from someone who's on the ground there. I mean, we've in the British media, we've heard bits and pieces about what's happening in Finland, and I've been very sceptical about what I've been told. From what's been portrayed in the BBC, these migrants are going over there and they're integrating well into society. Well, it's just a load of bullshit. I mean, I've gone on YouTube and I've looked up the situation myself, and I've seen a lot of angry Finns over there, and it's quite strange because whenever I've met people from Finland, they're very calm, very reserved, very highly educated. A lot of their teenagers have a better understanding of English than our own native teenagers do. That's how good the education system is. And I think their patience must be severely tested for them to be that pissed off. But it's good to see a part of Scandinavia standing up for itself. I know everyone knows that it's literally gonna be in flames soon, the way it's going over there at the moment. I think Norway it's not quite as bad over there yet, and I think with Denmark, with their with what's going on over there, they've woken up to the situation. Yeah, I do worry about Sweden a lot. I mean, I've got friends who are over there, and it's heartbreaking what's going on. You know.
Yeah, I feel a lot of kinship with the Scandinavia. I guess because I spent time over there, and I know Sweden, I know Norway particularly, and Denmark to some degree as well, quite well. And yeah, I have some kinship with those brothers over there. But hey, Ozzy, I see Ozzy is in the call.
Greetings.
And, good to meet you, man.
Ozzy.
Yeah.
Hi.
And I know Ozzy has had a particular experience with the whole Brexit thing, but how are you feeling about the Brexit itself? You know?
Well, I mean, so I'm sure you've covered a lot of the how we're thinking about Brexit topics, but how I'm feeling about Brexit is it's been living in a small English seaside town. It's been really nice to step outside my door and see what I can describe as the white guilt lifted from the usually depressed faces of my neighbours. You know, I'm stepping outside and I'm seeing old women smoking in their car, driving around, like 3 of them chuckling away, and it's just it's a fishing town, right? So these people have been stuck in quarantine in their waters, you know. But today there was a fish festival, right? We're celebrating the herring, we're celebrating all these different types of fish, and the fishermen are just. It's so nice to see whatever level of intelligence they are, and they might be. Let's say we're into peaceful parenting, we're into this and that. They might not be top quality people, but what a joy to see them celebrate getting their waters back and celebrate being white, being in their skin.
Yeah, I mean, the fishermen have really suffered. I mean, this is the Cornish thing. The same in Cornwall with the fishing, and I'm sure that's the same. Is it Folkestone you're in? I can't remember now.
Hastings, sorry, which is down.
Right, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, and that's the same down there, right? I mean, Brighton as well. Although Brighton doesn't have such a huge fishing community as maybe
just a big gay community.
Yeah. Right. You know, hopefully they're all with guns now. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's I certainly have some. I grew up because I grew up by the sea all my life. My father was. I come from an upper middle class background, of course, but my father was port operations manager in 5 different ports around the UK, and I knew fishermen, and my father knew fishermen and stuff like that, and so knew these people and their lives and everything like that. And I remember hearing sadly about fishermen that had died, while they were out fishing, and stuff like that as a child. And they weren't necessarily just people I kind of knew as a child just through my father, but these people work their asses off, in dangerous situations, and they've been pretty much neutered since the 1980s. They haven't been able to fish in their own waters, or they've been heavily restricted, and now it's down to small fishing boats that can just go 3 miles out to sea and stuff like that. Yeah. So I mean, it could be a huge revolution for the fishing industry in this country. You know,
Wasn't the EU giving subsidies to fishermen to no longer fish?
yeah, they were giving them subsidy even to break their ships
Burn
up.
their ships, yeah.
What gets me though is I'm no expert on fishing, though I love fish. I love herring. So that fish festival sounds fantastic, by the way. But a lot of these fishermen, they've been fishing for generations. It's been a generational thing where it's passed on father to son, especially in some coastal communities. And obviously we have big fishing waters. I think we can only fish something like 14%. Isn't that the quota or something?
We are really restricted heavily.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's almost like in the North Sea, for instance, Norway can fish almost 3 miles away from the English northeast coast, and we can't fish beyond it. It's ridiculous. It's insane. And hence why the north, particularly the northeast, was like Sunderland and Newcastle. Was big on the Brexit. And they were. I mean, fishing is just one aspect of that part of the world. Of course, it's not the only thing, but it was one major part of it.
What's really interesting, though, I mean, if you look at the northeast and the north in general, a lot of these have been the Labour heartlands, where UKIP have came second in most of the recent elections. And it'll be interesting to look at the next election, as most of these people obviously voted to leave. Will they totally turn their back on the Labour Party?
Yeah.
And I think then it begs the question: is the Labour Party particularly relevant anymore? Because it no longer represents the people who it was supposed to, which was the British working class. If anything, it's a lot of these lefty lovies, champagne socialists who live in their £2 million house in Islington, who are totally removed from what we see on a day-to-day level. They live in their gated communities. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I do think the Labour Party has been relegated to middle-class virtue signalling, and that's it. It doesn't represent. I mean, it might represent certain immigrant classes, but it doesn't really.
That's who votes for them now. It's either the champagne socialists, the middle classes, who feel they've got to be virtuous for everybody who's oppressed in the world, apart from their own, our own working classes. And the migrants, that's who vote for Labour now. I mean, my family, up until about 10 years ago, always used to vote Labour because they're, from a working class background. The area in general voted Labour, but now nobody votes for them anymore. So people generally, they don't vote because they don't want to vote Conservative, or they switch to UKIP.
Sure.
And all my family have gone from being Labour voters to UKIP voters within the space of only a few years.
Yeah.
So can I ask this question? So is it that I assume there's people who don't support Hillary but they're just anti-Trump, and I assume in Western politics in general, it's not that being conservative or voting conservative is taboo. So then you have those group of people who just consistently vote not conservative. So is UK kind of is UKIP kind of the more right, more conservative without having the stigma or the taboo? Would that be accurate?
No, I would say it's considered, certainly by the middle classes, as right-wing, as far right even, almost fascist. I mean, but
so it is like a conservative.
But by certain elements of the working classes, it's probably seen as kind of reasonable, right?
Okay.
Who would have otherwise voted for Labour, I think. And to be honest with you, when you look at them, they're not fascist. They're not far right at all. It's just a complete slur. I mean, there have been some nutty individuals amongst them. I'm not going to dismiss that. I mean, that would be silly. There have been some silliness in that party, but that's just because of the nature of political parties, and they're all made up of individuals, aren't they? So.
What I thought was particularly ironic, though, considering racism in British politics, was the recent anti-Semitism scandal in the Labour Party. So it's ironic that UKIP are cast as these backwards-thinking racists, when if you look at the Labour Party, which a lot of Muslims vote, a lot of Muslim councillors have been caught out recently on Facebook or on Twitter making disparaging comments towards Jews, not just criticising Israel, which anybody has the right to do, but freely criticising Jews.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's and that's still the only reason that abated was because the referendum came in. Hence why they're suddenly having a vote of no confidence in Corbyn now. But I wanted to go a little bit back. I mean, I guess it kind of encompasses the Trump issue as much as the Brexit one, and it's kind of something I wanted to sort of draw, hopefully draw Ozzy, and I don't want to sort of make him talk about personal stuff if he doesn't really feel like talking about it. But I wanted to talk about the sort of name calling and the way that, particularly after, I mean, it was bad enough beforehand, but it seems to have escalated well beyond what it was beforehand after they lost. And the name calling, the racist calling, the horrible accusations about people who'd voted out and stuff like that, and something that I've been acutely aware of over the last couple of days, looking over Twitter, looking over Facebook, not so much Facebook because I keep my Facebook's fairly not public, and I just resort to listening to some friends, some of which are on the left, of course, but not exclusively, but certainly on Twitter and the mainstream media and stuff like that. And I was curious. I mean, obviously you'd had some. I mean, you don't have to talk about the personal stuff, of course, but you've had some personal attacks and yourself from people, and I just want to sort of give the idea that Ozzy's in his early 20s, I guess, early to mid 20s and stuff, and you'd had some pretty horrible experiences of that, but I just talk broadly about it. You don't talk necessarily about specific cases, but how are you feeling about that now?
Sure. Well, so it was from, I got a couple of messages over Facebook, and they were from people who I once considered A, either incredibly close in my life, or B, a part of my life. And the degree to which they did a sort of 180 on me, and decided that it turned out all this time, oh, Ozzy was definitely just an idiot, and he can't have any possible reason to be voting Leave. He's clearly just an idiot. Like, let's not bother to ask. I mean, let's just go straight for the personal attacks. Was a dead giveaway that there's no conversation to be had there, and it's a shame. But yeah. I mean, I'm still a little bit stumped. It makes me sad because,
of course, it's people you've been around, right, over the years.
Yeah. It's sad to see with what venom they can turn around and spit in the face of someone they once considered. And you wouldn't treat if somebody. Was it you who said that to me, Pat? Oh, I don't know. Sorry, somebody else maybe. So that they wouldn't treat somebody that badly if they'd stolen from me. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And it was a real shock to see the level to which they would sink to get no point across. There was no. They didn't even make really a point.
No arguments at all. It literally is vitriol, and I mean, let's say some of the comments that was thrown at you, if you'd thrown them at a woman, let's say, I mean, it would have been all over Twitter as though you'd been the most abusive man in the world, So.
And that kind of oddly perhaps calmed me down. It was like, I know the level to which that is just ridiculous, and that allows me some peace in it, because there's no time I'm spending with these people now.
No.
And that gives me time to relax and say, yes, that was dreadful, but easy to let go when you know that it's so ridiculous.
Yeah. Has anyone else been subject to that type of abuse? I'm just curious.
Yes. I mean, my circle of friends, as a musician, are generally a scene of Remainers, and I know their points. I've been around their points for a long time, and I probably would have been in the Remain camp had I not taken the journey into this realm. But now I have better things to.
I hear it's called taking the black pill now.
Yeah, I have one other friend who is also a musician and also voted this way, and incredibly smart guy, and he was posting for months, just loads of different points of view. You couldn't stop him. And the other day, when the vote came out, he said, "Oh, I've been too outspoken," because all of a sudden, everyone on his friends list, not everyone, there's been understanding people, but it has been shocking to see the degree to which this has been taken, and it does affect people's lives personally. I'm not ignoring that. There's a lot of things that are going to change, but it is missing the points that we're all making.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you know, we talk at FDR about issues around the family and all that kind of stuff, and that often causes a lot of antagonism and stuff like that. But, you know, this particular issue, and I'm assuming that's similar, like for you in the US, Jared, you know, with the Trump thing, it seems to cause great deal of animosity, you know. And maybe it's just a few and far between and stuff, and maybe, you know, Aussie's like closer to that kind of generation that perhaps act out in that way. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily just that generation. It's all generations potentially connect that way. But yeah, it's a sort of it seems to be a game changer in relationships terms, you know.
I would link it now back to R versus K in that you would only feel so threatened if your way of life was, you know, on the brink.
Yeah, or felt it was on the brink.
For years now, I've been kind of following FDR and getting bit by bit more and more involved, and so I've been kind of vocal and, you know, posting my positions for a long, long time now, so I don't have a whole lot of people left around me that either don't know where I'm coming from already and have had plenty of opportunity to get off the ship, you know. Right. So I don't experience a lot of direct, I haven't experienced a lot of personal attack, and to some degree, I got to add, like in some ways, it's like I pat myself on the back, like I got that out of my life. But at the same time, it's like, you know, I'm not also fighting the good fight in the sense that, you know, I haven't been called a racist in a month, you know, or you know, and it's like maybe I'm not doing my part entirely, you know, and but then and at work and at social places, there's a professional atmosphere there, so there's not as much personal contention that comes into it, but again, at this point, anyone at work knows where I come from, you know, to a large extent. You know, if you're gonna talk disparagingly about the way people treat kids or anything like that, or if you're going to talk disparagingly about children or this or that, you know, and I'm in earshot, you're going to get some statistics and you're going to get some, you know, some reasons, some arguments from the other side. I'm not saying I always do a fantastic job, but I'm not trying necessarily, I got to add, like, I'm not necessarily trying primarily to move the conversation forward because, you know, this is my professional environment. That's not my soapbox necessarily, but I also don't want to put up with what is to me a toxic environment, you know. So it's kind of a defensive reaction somewhat on my part.
Yeah, your situation is very much like mine. I've very much controlled my environment in that regard for at least the last 4 years, I think. I can think at least in the last 4 years. So yeah, I don't necessarily deal with that. And if I do come across it, I will be reasonable and have a reasonable conversation. I don't necessarily get into arguments with people at all about it. But I have the benefit of being in a position of authority to some degree, so that helps. Okay. You know, so you know, I'm manager and all that kind of thing. So. But you know, I'm always reasonable about it, but I'm always kind of firm about what people, you know, what I feel is reasonable and not reasonable. But you know, it's just there is that kind of thing. But I'm acutely aware of people like Ozzy, perhaps you, Aaron, as well, and others out there. You know, Melon perhaps and all that, where you're kind of surrounded by people that perhaps are a little bit toxic and you know they need dismissing. You know, in this regard.
Well, I think like I just want to share an appreciation that you guys are kind of making those points, even with having knowing you might be subject to those consequences, you know, from those folks. You know,
yeah, there is a certain amount of bravery in all of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, this has been a subject that people can't ignore. Brexit. Everyone's been involved here, so I might have said something about parenting, or I might have said something. I mean, well, even then, you get something back. You get a bit of backlash, but way less than this. And you know, I'm definitely still in that scene where every friend I have posts a status saying "never been more ashamed to be British," and you know,
Right.
and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
They see me as maybe the wolf in sheep's clothing that we're just trying to hang out with them still. So it's
Yeah.
there's no room for me to speak, and that is what it is. But you know, the minds are made up. When I'm already the idiot, the village idiot, it's no chance, you know.
Do you think they're just kind of keeping you around as a punching bag, or someone to take out their?
No, I mean, well, it varies. There's the types that just hate my guts, or there's the types that just would talk about me behind my back and think, oh, that guy, you know, he thinks this, or
You're in a work situation, aren't you, Oz? Of course. So your work, I say work, I mean kind of loosely work. You're in a work situation where you're dealing sometimes with people that you kind of have to just. And I mean, I have to deal with people who are pro opposite of Brexit and stuff, but I must admit nobody's ever thrown any insults at me at work. So I will say that. But I mean, you are in a kind of work situation, but it's a kind of work friendship thing, isn't it? Or like,
it's you know, I wish I was in one of your guys' work situations, and I feel like I'm edging towards it now because, God, but it's being in a few bands, and it's being in things in the music scene where it's just a bit more volatile. There's room to thrash around.
Yeah.
It was nice to meet you, Aaron.
See you, Aaron.
Aaron's off. Okay, Aaron, man. Take care. I think we should probably bring it to a close. We've probably had a good 2-hour conversation, and I don't want to sort of make this too long-winded, but man, great to Brexit. I mean, hopefully, who knows? But
hey,
I don't.
Congrats, guys. That's awesome.
I don't want to get too over the top about it, but you know, I think it's a good thing, and I definitely look forward to the comments on this video and stuff, and hopefully we've had a really good in-depth conversation about a broad one, you know. But really, thank you everyone for joining. That's you, Jared, Melon, Ozzy, Ryan earlier, and of course Aaron as well. So yeah, let's good night, good day, whatever. Speak to you soon.
Thanks for putting it together, Patrick. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Farewell.
Nice to meet you, fellas.
Yeah, and you.